Good morning, everyone, and welcome to New York City's official True Cost of Living Analyzing for Impact webinar. I am Christina A. Dozier, FPWA's Chief of Membership and External Affairs. We are so excited that you have chosen to take time to join us today in what is sure to be an informative, enlightening, and empowering webinar gathering. In terms of agenda, here's what you can expect this morning. Jennifer Jones Austin and David R. Jones, who are co-chairs of the National True Cost of Living Coalition, will share opening remarks. We will then hear from Deputy Mayor Julie Su and Chief Equity Officer and Commissioner Afua Atta-Mensah, followed by a presentation on the true cost of living data and an overview of how these findings can be utilized by policymakers, advocates, and others. We will then have Q&A and end with some closing remarks. In terms of Q&A, please feel free to drop any questions into the Q&A function on Zoom throughout the webinar, and we will do our best to get to them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. I will now turn it over to FPWA CEO and Executive Director and Co-Chair of the National True Cost of Living Coalition, Jennifer Jones Austin.
Good morning, and thank you, Christina. Thank you all for joining us for this important and unprecedented conversation. A conversation about what it costs to live in New York City securely and with dignity. What it costs not just to get by, but to get ahead and stay ahead. And about how to make use of the first official municipal true cost of living measure to help inform, and help shape public policy that helps to ensure that we all of us here in New York, have the opportunity not just to survive, but to actually thrive. Now, what we appreciate is that for far too long, too many low and middle income New Yorkers' financial struggles have gone unseen by government because official measures of the cost of living have been rooted in deprivation and in subsistence. And thus, they've never told the full story of what it actually costs to live here or anywhere in America. This issue became all too clear for us here at FPWA back in 2018, when after the minimum wage in New York State was increased to $15 hourly, we began researching how families in counties across the state were at risk of falling off of the benefits cliff, earning a meager few dollars more, but consequently too much to still qualify for essential income supports. FPWA's work in this space began even before that, when we launched a successful campaign to effect a New York City living wage floor for human service workers who themselves were earning what were considered good wages, but yet they were still qualifying for income supports very much like their clients. 25% of them were making less than $9 an hour, 40% less than $14 an hour, and the majority of them Black and brown people. In early 2021, FPWA began speaking out about this, here, there, and everywhere. We were in public spaces, in papers, in the press, talking about the need for a true cost of living here in New York City. We've actually been recognized for speaking out here and across the country about the nation's affordability crisis and the need for a true cost of living long before it became a defining election issue and campaign promise in the nation. And then what happened in 2021, when I had the honor of chairing New York City's Racial Justice Commission, the first ever in the nation, that was created to change the city charter to embed racial justice and equity in all government functions. And we heard directly from thousands of New Yorkers of color about their experiences with ongoing economic injustice. We decided it was imperative that we bring the true cost of living to the commission. And the commissioners, all 11 of us together, we studied the data, we studied the matter, and then we determined in 2022 to put a true cost of living measure on the ballot for New Yorkers to decide. And decide they did. 81% of New Yorkers voted. 81% of those who voted for the measure. Citizens from all 5 boroughs, from across the political spectrum, and across the socioeconomic spectrum voted for the measure. They voted for all the measures. And then in the years since, from 2022, FPWA and other entities have stayed the course. We partnered with the Community Service Society and the Urban Institute to establish the National True Cost of Living Coalition to effect a national true cost of living measure centered in economic security, appreciating that New York was not alone. And we now have that measure. And then we continued pressing with the city to ensure that it did the same. Abide by the will of the people to establish a true cost of living based in security and dignity. It took a while, but it was worth it for the reasons that you'll soon hear. Mayor Mamdani and his administration, with Deputy Mayor Sue and Chief Equity Officer Atta-Mensah, took office, and in less than 100 days, they released the racial equity plans that were approved by New Yorkers and the city's official true cost of living measure and first report that presents for our knowledge and our use the data about costs and resources needed in our city for individuals and families of varying types to survive and thrive. The true cost of living measure is not on its own a mandate to affect a specific piece of legislation or policy or to implement a certain program. It doesn't automatically require government to act or spend, and it doesn't create a personal right of action. But what it does do is give policymakers and policy influencers, advocates, service providers, academics, community leaders, and everyday New Yorkers a clear and irrefutable data-driven picture of what families actually need to live with security, freedom, and dignity. It's a tool, and like any tool, its value depends in great part on how we use it. Our job, all of us, our job is to ensure that this data shapes and helps inform the policy discussions and the decisions being made across the city so that New Yorkers can not only survive, but thrive. We in New York City now have the opportunity, we have data to lead the city and the nation in centering dignity and justice, economic justice in policymaking. And we're going to get to it. So now what I'm going to do is turn the conversation for just a few minutes over to my co-chair for the National True Cost of Living Coalition, partner in this work, David Jones, President and CEO of the Community Service Society of New York. You all know him. We all know him. I engaged him in this work because he is a champion for people who have struggled long and hard in this city. He's been a tireless advocate for working class New Yorkers for decades, and his organization's research has helped validate and contextualize what this data is telling us. David?
Sorry, it's always technical problems for me. But thank you, Jennifer, for the introduction. I have to give Jennifer and FPWA credit for really being supercharging this effort. We joined it after she explained what they were about. It's so closely aligned with the work we were doing and actually some of the research we were doing that it was an honor to join this coalition. As some of you may know, CSS conducts research to better understand the needs and strengths and experiences of New Yorkers throughout the state and what things are helping them and the things that are getting in the way of them thriving and improving their families' chances. For more than 20 years, however, directly related to this campaign, we've surveyed New Yorkers to understand the challenges they face so that we can help create effective policies at government and elsewhere to truly support them. The true cost of living measure uses quantitative data to quantify economic security. Our annual survey offers a complementary perspective, capturing residents' real experiences with housing, debt, savings, and employment that illuminate the realities beyond those cost and resource numbers that the true cost of living measure provides and the impact that it's having on their well-being. One of our survey's central findings this year is the financial difficulties in New York extends well beyond those living in poverty. Low, moderate, and even higher income households report struggling to manage essential costs like utilities, housing, healthcare, food, and transportation, while also facing unprecedented expense and rising debt and stagnant wages. Consider this, more than a third of moderate income New Yorkers rely on short-term debt, such as credit cards and cash advances to cover everyday expenses. That's not a formula for economic stability. The true cost of living measures also captures savings as a key component of economic security. Our survey found that 1 in 4 New Yorkers have no emergency savings at all. That jumps to over half for low-income families, but moderate and middle-income families are also expressing that they don't have the reserves necessary to cope with even a minor setback. A quarter of respondents couldn't or probably couldn't handle a $400 emergency. And the true cost of living reveals this too. If they can meet other costs, people can afford to save and build financial reserves to have a future, either in retirement or to help their children and grandchildren. Today's affordability crisis is structural and not temporary. And in New York, it's magnified by high costs for everything from housing to healthcare to everyday goods and services. And New Yorkers, and I think, are asking, how are people supposed to get ahead economically? How hard is it for many people to get ahead financially, even when they're working full time? So we're very excited that the Mamdani administration is delivering on a true cost of living measure that the public can see, understand, and use. Because when leaders, political leaders and otherwise, measure the right things, they can design better policies that make it possible to show where these policies are working. And also recognizing this doesn't only apply to the very poor, but this also applies to people across the economic spectrum. A very important move by the new administration. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. He's been a true partner. He and CSS have been true partners in this work, a great example of what like-minded people can do, like-minded organizations when working together for the good of New Yorkers. So thank you for being here and thank you for all your work. Now I am honored, I'm overjoyed, I'm filled with excitement to introduce to both to everybody who's here, two leaders who are now part of the Mayor Mamdani administration. These are two individuals who, in many ways, are no stranger to the work. They have been delivering for people here in New York and across this nation, working families and individuals for many, many years. And we're just thrilled to have them now working for the city of New York. First, we're going to hear from New York's first Deputy Mayor of Economic Justice, the first Deputy Mayor of Economic Justice, Julie Su. She's a champion for working families and economic equity. And we're really grateful for her leadership and partnership in advancing this work at the city level. It's not easy to assume a new role, but the wonderful thing is that it gives her the opportunity to create and use the experience that she's had, having served as a United States Secretary of Labor, where she played a critical role in fighting for workers and ensuring a just day's pay for a hard day's work, saving the pensions of more than 1 million union workers and retirees. She's going to get to bring that here. Now, what we know is she's got a very busy schedule, so she's here with us for just a short while, not able to stay for the entirety of the time, but we plan to get into a lot of good trouble with Julie Su over the coming next several years. And so this is not the only time that we'll be hearing from her. We'll be partnering with her, all of us. And after Deputy Mayor Su speaks, then we'll hear from our Chief Equity Officer and Commissioner, Afua Atta-Mensah. Like our Deputy Mayor, Commissioner Atta-Mensah has been hard at work on behalf of vulnerable people, people made vulnerable, communities made vulnerable for many, many years. Boots on the ground and also fighting in the corridors of government, in our courtrooms. She's just a tremendous champion. She's been working since before she got into office with the mayoral administration to actually help bring this true cost of living measure into reality, and helping now to translate the vision of the Racial Justice Commission into concrete action. So I'm thrilled that they're both here. First, we'll hear from Deputy Mayor Su, and then we'll hand it over to Commissioner Atta-Mensah for remarks and a presentation on the true cost of living.
Jennifer, thank you so much. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you clearly.
Okay, I always say this, but I know I'm doing my job well if I am in and around the city with Jennifer Jones Austin. And so thank you all for this opportunity, and thank you to FPWA for all the work that made today and the reports we're talking about possible. Um, so my mom came to this country on a cargo ship from China because she couldn't afford a passenger ticket. And I grew up understanding what affordability was before I even learned the word. There is just the general sense of insecurity that doesn't announce itself, but seeps into every day. There's the ways that children learn to ask how much before asking, can we? And I grew up with that deep sense that somehow belonging and security were something that other people could enjoy, but not us. And then my mom got a union job working for Los Angeles County. From the outside, a small change, but from the inside, it completely rewired our lives. She could come home at 5:30 each day, no longer having to work multiple jobs. We could go to see a doctor when she was sick or when we were sick. And now that she's retired, she has a pension. And I say all of this not as biography, but as policy. Stability is something that government can choose to make possible or not. And that is why Mayor Mamdani created the first ever deputy mayor for economic justice for New York City. It is the vision that in this city, we can bring together economic growth that actually lowers costs and strengthens neighborhoods, that we can protect and enforce laws so that workers, consumers, communities who felt left out when government acts actually get protected from exploitation and abuse. And so that we are not just filling physical potholes and building physical roads and bridges, but that we're also building a different kind of infrastructure, the social and economic infrastructure that makes life possible in New York City for everybody. So people have said, since we're talking about justice, why aren't you talking about economic growth? We are talking about growth, but what's different is that we are for shared growth. You can have a booming skyline and a shrinking life in New York City, and we are not going to pretend that that's enough. Which brings me to what we're here to talk about today, which is the true cost of living measure. This measure, as Jennifer has said, is not like the federal poverty line. It's not a measure of how not to be poor. It's a measure of what it takes to actually live in New York City. And here's what the data says, that 62% of New Yorkers, more than 5 million people, cannot meet the true cost of living in this city. Now, that number alone should stop every one of us. But the racial breakdowns make the full picture unavoidable. 44% of white New Yorkers fall below the true cost of living. That's already a crisis. But the figure is 66% for Black New Yorkers. It's 63% for Asian and Pacific Islanders. And it is 78% for Hispanic New Yorkers. Now, all those numbers are unacceptable, and none of them are inevitable. They are the result of policy choices, choices that were made and choices that we are choosing to unmake. That's why we released the true cost of living measure alongside the preliminary citywide racial equity plan, because together they tell one story. And one thing I've said about this, just to give it some historical context, is that the things that we're talking about doing right now, public goods for the public good, right? Investing in people and measuring whether we're successful by whether all communities actually benefit, is not entirely new. This country once embraced public investments. The GI Bill, affordable public college, publicly backed loans for home ownership. But I don't need to tell this group, when Black Americans fought for equal access to those things, backlash politics taught people to resent government programs instead of expanding them. And while Black families were hit first and hardest, the result was that every American, workers all across America, faced lower wages, more debt, and a shrinking middle class. And that's the history that is reflected in the numbers that we will talk about today. And it tells us something really important from a policy perspective. When we invest in the communities that have been denied the most, we're not taking from one group to give to another. We are rebuilding the foundations, the infrastructure that holds everybody up. I want to put this another way. In 2019, McKinsey put out a study that found that if we just closed the black-white wealth gap in this country, that it would generate some $1 to $1.5 trillion to the US economy by 2028. Now, we didn't do that in 2019, and we're almost at 2028. And so to pause and think about what could have been if we had actually focused on eliminating the black-white wealth gap is pretty sobering. And what that same study said is that closing that racial wealth gap would have increased the GDP by 4 to 6%. Now, keep in mind, I said this was a McKinsey study, not some radical group, the kind of groups that probably we would all be a part of. This is the McKinsey Institute. And what this tells us is that fighting systemic racism is not just the right thing to do, it's good economic policy. So, this data, the tools we're talking about today, they're not going to sit on a shelf. It's going to inform everything that we do. It's informing how we target where childcare goes. Right? This is a signature policy priority of Mayor Mamdani, and we're going to make sure that care and universal child care go to those communities who've been left behind when we invest $1.2 billion in state funds. It's informing where we put grocery stores. We just went to East Harlem, El Barrio yesterday to announce that that's going to be a site of a grocery store that will bring down costs and also create good jobs and also make sure that there are healthy food options for all communities throughout New York City. It's informing where we direct our enforcement so that working people and working people of color know that the city is on their side. And it's shaping where economic development lands. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you on all of that. So just to close out, racial equity cannot just be something we talk about. It's got to be something we do, and it's got to be something people feel. And they'll only feel it when there's a fair day's pay for a just day's work for every single New Yorker, where people can afford to raise their kids, where they can keep more of what they earn, and where they feel like they actually belong in this city. Those should not be impossible things that we only dream of doing. And in this administration, we look forward to working all of you to make sure that we're investing in those New Yorkers who are least able to afford the city as a way to lift up all New Yorkers across the city. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, my friend, someone I'm so privileged to work with every single day. She is the Chief Equity Officer, also the first in the city, and heads up the Mayor's Office for Equity and Racial Justice, Afua Atta-Mensah.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor Sue. Good morning to everyone. As was said, my name is Afua Atta-Mensah, and I'm excited to serve as the Chief Equity Officer for the City of New York and as the Commissioner for the Mayor's Office for Equity and Racial Justice. I'm excited to be with you all today. I know many of you are nonprofit leaders, human service providers who have operated, frankly, as a canary in the coal mine for so many of us in government, making clear that, listen, the cost of living in New York is high. Too many New Yorkers are having to make choices in regards to whether or not they pay for a child care provider or buy their medicine, how much of their rent they can afford this month, whether or not they can save. And so it has been your work that has helped to push us to this moment. And I think it is appropriate that our first briefing is with you all today to talk about this true cost of living. Jennifer mentioned that we are here because of a charter amendment from 2022. And so the release of this true cost of living is a direct mandate for the people. It moves us beyond outdated poverty metrics and instead allows us to measure what it takes to actually live and thrive in New York City. The measure captures 12 essential cost categories, including housing, childcare, food, and transportation, and accounts for both wages and government supports that New Yorkers rely on. Deputy Mayor Sue just told us some of the stark results from this report, that 62% of New Yorkers do not meet the true cost of living threshold. It means that too many New Yorkers are grappling with high costs and don't make what they must earn to meet these costs. And so I want to be clear about the importance of this report. This is not a research exercise. That's not what we're here for. This is an operational tool. The true cost of living measure will be published annually, allowing the city for the first time to benchmark how its investments are truly improving affordability for New Yorkers. We're not going to be able to solve the affordability crisis without intentionally addressing the disparities and inequity that disproportionately impact Black and Brown New Yorkers. Deputy Mayor Sue just took us through some of the startling disparities within this study. And so now we have seen and must act. City agencies are now incorporating these insights into their racial equity planning, targeting investments, aligning resources, and centering the needs of underserved communities. We see this true cost of living as an important tool to ensure that New Yorkers are able to meet their cost of living and to help us identify meaningful strategies and investments to ensure working families are supported here. Ultimately, this is about ensuring that every New Yorker, every one of us, has the opportunity not just to survive, but to actually enjoy and live it with dignity in the city we call home. Now, before I kick us off with the main event here, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the partnership and collaboration that has helped get us here. I want to just thank again Community Service Society, FPWA, Jennifer Jones Austin, who is just a force of nature and whose leadership was pivotal in helping us develop the true cost of living and advancing the true cost of economic security framework. And we are also deeply grateful to the Urban Institute, whose expertise was instrumental in developing the technical assistance behind this measure. And so I am very excited to call on to the screen our colleague Shahab Chowdhury to walk you through the analysis and what the data reveals about the New York City's true cost of living. So Shahab Chowdhury, who serves as a senior policy advisor in the Mayor's Office of Equity and Racial Justice, is going to walk us through this. And so I'm very excited. Shahab, please take us through.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Atta-Mensah. Good morning, everybody. I will be walking you through the key findings from the true cost of living measure that we've just heard about. I just want to thank our leadership again. Thank you to all the incredible leadership from all the speakers that we've heard today to make this a reality, to ensure that we can talk about what it costs to live with dignity in New York City. So we have heard about sort of some of the top line findings, but wanted to start off by really talking through sort of what did it take to make the measure? This measure that represents a fundamental shift in how we talk about and understand economic security, how we really come to understand this moment in time to be able to fulfill a charter mandate. And so, New York City really is the first city in the country to be able to measure economic security in this particular way. To meet the spirit of the charter, New York City leveraged a lot of local and national research to best determine costs for New Yorkers across all the various household sides, types, family types, age groups, and essential areas in need. Just, picture this, you're walking to your bodega, you're getting on a train to get to work. Think of all the different families you meet, all the different folks that you encounter. New York's so beautiful because we're able to see all the different beautiful diversity that just hits us in every single way possible, right? Imagine all the costs that they're facing. Every family faces a different cost. So we really spend a lot of time thinking about what are those costs, those essential costs that are critical towards being able to live with a sense of dignity. And so we really spend a lot of time thinking through and incorporating categories critical to economic security, to living with dignity, to being able to have the ability to thrive, which includes debt and savings. We looked at sort of cost across various age groups and individuals, including individuals with disabilities, the first measure to really do this and think about this. What are caregiving costs for persons with disabilities? And thinking about folks that who are traditionally often overlooked in measures or are often unseen, and what is it we can do to make sure that those costs are accurately measured so that we're ensuring that every person experiencing marginalization is able to see their costs reflected in this measure. So we as a in developing this measure, we had a couple of core principles that we wanted to focus on in terms of setting a strong standard. These are really focused on making sure that we're capturing all costs that are relevant to New York City families, that we're using high quality public data sources, that we're measuring all resources accurately to cover that are available to New York City families to cover costs, and that we're understanding how costs vary by family types and across boroughs, and that we're grounding all of this in the lived experience of New York City families. In doing so, we realized that uh, what New Yorkers need to spend it's a lot. I'm sure y'all are all counting all these things that are adding up in sort of the experiences that you face, right? And so we identified New York City specific measures for 12 essential cost category areas that you see on the screen here today. So for housing, we use median
Shahab, I
rent.
am so sorry to interrupt. You're sharing your notes slide and folks are having difficulty seeing. Would you be able
Oh,
to share in full screen? Thank you.
yeah, my apologies. One second. Here we go. Is it still on outside?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies about that. I'm so sorry. Um, y'all missed out on the good stuff. I'm so sorry. Okay, so what New Yorkers need to spend. So for housing, we use median rents from the 2023 New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey, broken down by household size, borough, accessibility designation. This also includes utilities. For food, we adapt sort of the USDA's low-cost food plan, so one above subsistence, using Map the Meal gap data to reflect New York City specific costs. For healthcare, we look at two different components. So, every human being needs healthcare. So we look at insurance premiums and we assign those costs based on the ACA's marketplace second lowest cost silver plan at full unsubsidized rates from the Kaiser Family Foundation. And we also incorporate out-of-pocket medical expenses using the CPS data adjusted for New York City through Census Bureau county level imputations. For childcare, which we know is a big expense of families experience here in raising a family, we use the Department of Labor's national database weighted for home and center-based care, covering children up until the age of 13 and those 13 to 18 who receive SSI. Disability care, we are assigning costs based on how the American Community Survey defines disability and on two particular definitions, and we'll get to that in a bit. And we use Care Scouts 2023 home health aid rates with hours estimated from our own research that we did to create this bespoke measure. We also look at transportation and technology. We look at debt services, specifically on student loan payments. We are able to calculate using ADIS taxes and savings. So Urban Institute has this beautiful, really special power through this ADIS microsimulation model. And so we're able to calculate taxes and apply taxes to all the different family types. And then we also account for costs. So these are all the essential costs that families face that we that are the start to understanding what the cost of living is in New York City. On the resource side, we have sort of what New Yorkers have available to them. earned income, which is captured through sort of the American Community Survey, capturing annual earnings, so the wages you make, right? So we also are able to look at investment income, interest, dividends, rent, pension, retirement distributions. We incorporate tax credits. So we look at the federal, state, and New York City specific tax credits using ADIS enhanced modeling to capture federal, state, and New York City specific credits that families receive. We're able to account for cash transfers, which include TANF and SSI and unemployment benefits. And we align that with administrative data because we know there is underreporting. So oftentimes there's not really good reporting here. So we use ADIS to account for appropriate reporting here. And what's really special about our measure is that we're able to incorporate New York City specific in-kind support. So the kind of resources that the city provides, city programs like City FEPS and SCREE and DREE, free universal pre-K and 3K using New York City administrative data. And we also account for the federal in-kind supports like SNAP and WIC and housing vouchers and childcare subsidies, and account for health insurance value, family support, and child support. These things help us to really develop a heuristic of first, what do we mean by meeting the true cost of living? So we see what does it cost, right? So on one side, and this is really important as we move forward, on one side, we're looking at what are all the essential costs that people face, so housing and food and healthcare and childcare and disability care, transportation, technology, all the 12 essential category areas. And then we're using this by measuring the threshold. So the threshold is the annual cost to cover the essentials in a specific borough for a specific family type under those costs. We compare that to what you have, which is all the earnings and income that you make, plus non-market resources that may include Social Security and Medicare and tax credits and public benefits. And then, if what you have does not meet that threshold, so if it doesn't meet what that cost is, there's a gap. So if what you have falls short, it means you do not meet the true cost of living threshold. And so thresholds vary by family size and age and disability and borough. There's no single number per se, but it's really important to keep this in mind. And before we dive into the core key findings, I wanted to kind of use this as an illustrative example of what do we mean by the true cost of living threshold. What does it cost for a family with kids to live in New York City? We see here are the median annual costs. So this is if you line up all the families with kids, you pick the 50th percentile. The it costs $159,197 a year for a family with kids to be able to live in New York City. And these costs are across housing and miscellaneous costs and taxes and food, savings, childcare, transit, healthcare. On the left, you'll see what those particular stat costs are, right? So you see those costs of housing and miscellaneous costs and the taxes owed, and even the ability to save for an emergency. So we account for that in savings. And on the right is everything. So on the right, you'll see a number, $124,007. That is the total median resources for the median family household. So that's how much they're bringing in. So that includes the wages, it includes tax credits, government benefits like pre-K, 3K, housing vouchers, all of that. And so that resource comes in at $124,007. And the difference you see between those two bars is what we mean when we say a family does not meet the true cost of living, and that the total number of total resources number keeps those government supports in mind. And so what do we find? What's all this about, right? So we'll start off here with the thresholds, right? So what does it cost to live based on the family household type? So for a single adult, no kids, it costs $70,344 to be able to meet the cost of living in New York City. For two adults and two children, it is at $166,000 to be able to meet the cost of living. So if you're a two adult, two kids family, so you see that costs rise significantly as individuals decide to start families and to grow families. And what we see here is that costs vary, right? So there's no one particular cost for a single family, but costs vary based on the family, the experience that they have, and what they face. And as you heard from Deputy Mayor Su and you heard from Commissioner Atta-Mensah, we are seeing this, that this is the headline finding that 62% of New Yorkers do not meet the true cost of living. It's more than 5 million people. It's 3 times higher than the New York City Gov poverty measure, which is at 20.5%, which is a critical and important tool and measure that helps us understand acute need. And with the true cost of living measure, with this measure, we specifically are able to now understand the full spectrum of economic need, of economic hardship in New York City. We're able to see what we can account for as this missing middle that was not previously captured in previous measures like the federal poverty measure. We're able to see that over 5 million, under about 5 million people are experiencing forms of economic hardship. So what does that distribution of economic hardship look like? So when we say 62% of New Yorkers are unable to meet the cost of living, what that means is that um, we see that 8% of New Yorkers can meet all costs except for savings. So this group can pay all the bills, but are unable to save. So they're one emergency away from falling into um, more hardship. There are no retirement savings or no emergency funds, so there's more vulnerability there. We're saying 15% of New Yorkers have 75 to 90% of their resources to be able to meet their cost of living. There are 25% of New Yorkers, this is the largest category and largest group. 25% of New Yorkers are unable to meet, are within 50 to 75% of their ability to meet the cost of living, and that 13% of New Yorkers have less than 50% of the true cost of the resources they need to meet the cost of living. This is the full spectrum of economic distribution of what this hardship looks like. And this is what it looks like. This is about basic dignity and security. And we can see through this finding just what it would take to meet that cost of living and what it looks like across the board. And so in the slide, you'll see sort of the three median costs and resources by family type in New York City. It helps us to understand the annual cost composition for each household type, right? You know that families with kids make up a big portion of New Yorkers, but there are also lots of adults with no kids. And we see that for adults with no kids, the median annual cost threshold is $106,346. Housing, healthcare, and taxes are the top three cost drivers for those families. 54% of adults under the age of 65 who do not have kids, so the median do not meet the cost of living. Again, this is our flagship finding here is that for families with kids, the costs are $159,197. There's a 50% increase that when a family decides to start couples decide to start families, we see that costs specifically rise through childcare, healthcare, and food, which increase costs by about over $50,000. In this number that you see here around childcare, I just want to note that this childcare number accounts for the median family costs for all families with kids from 0 to 18. So this number is the 50th percentile of all childcare costs for every family, for the median family with kids across New York City. And so we know that families with children under the age of 5 experience much higher cost in being able to look for center-based childcare. I'm going to quickly just run through this, but we see that there's borough variation in the true cost of living. We see that in the Bronx, 75% of Bronxites are unable to meet the cost of living. In Staten Island, it's 48%. So there's a 27 percentage point spread between the Bronx and Staten Island, and it really reflects a difference in resources, not costs. We find that median costs across boroughs are relatively comparable. The Bronx has some of the lowest costs, but it also has much lower median resources. We see that intra-borough disparities are very stark, and they range from 22 to 52 percentage points. We see that and this chart kind of presents that data. Specifically, it looks at what we see here, where that racial disparities are far righter within boroughs. In Manhattan, 85% of Hispanic and Latine New Yorkers and 80% of Black New Yorkers do not meet the cost of living in New York City, compared to 33% of white New Yorkers. It is a 52 percentage point gap within a single borough. This is the largest gap that we find in sort of our findings of this inaugural measure. So we see that every borough has the same pattern, that intra-borough racial disparities sort of exceeds the differences between boroughs. And so it kind of masks some of the lived experiences that community colors face, but something that's crucial. Raising a kid is far exceeds what most families can afford. We see that 73% of New Yorkers live in households where resources do not meet the true cost of living. This is the highest rate of any age group. We see that there are higher annual resource gaps. We see that the true cost of living rate by the number of single earners versus dual earners varies. So in two adult households with children, 67% of folks do not meet the cost of living. For single earner families, so single parent families, it's 84%. So we see significant disparities that exist there. Disability and caregiving costs nearly doubles the cost of living. So we, wanted to mention this again, is that under the American Community Survey, there are 6 different definitions for disability types. And so we are using 2 of them, of like difficulty bathing and difficulty dressing, to identify self-care disability. We find that the median annual cost for disability-related costs is $55,400 for families with self-care disability under the age of 65. This single cost category exceeds the entire resource gap for most other family types. This also, families with a member with any disability or with self-care disability also have the highest true cost of living thresholds. Importantly, adults over 65, 61% of adults over 65 do not meet the true cost of living. 71% of single adults 65 and above do not meet the true cost of living. We see that non-market resources are really crucial for for adults over the age of 65. Social Security and Medicare help really lower the true cost of living resource gap that these families face. Ultimately, this work has policy implications, right? It has policy implications because we know that the affordability crisis is universal, right? We see that there's a structural consistency in New York City where 29 out of 36 different demographic groups particularly are within a $30,000 to $50,000 annual resource gap that they face. It's 81% of all demographic groups that we see. And so what does this mean, right? In terms of some of the implications that it has. And so in terms of wage adequacy, we see that using this data is centered in 2022. We're going to be updating this measure on an annual basis, so we'll be using more recent data in the coming years. But if we use the New York State minimum wage of $15 an hour, we see that only 44% of that minimum wage job would cover all costs that a single adult with no kids faces. We see that it would require basically a single adult to work 2 jobs to be able to meet the cost of living. It would require them to work 90 hours a week just to be able to do this. We also find that the impact of the safety net, that government programs lower the cost of living, they support working families. We find that tax credits, SNAP, housing vouchers, Medicaid, city FEPs, and so many more, and universal pre-K help to reduce the amount of folks that can meet the true cost of living. We see that without non-market resources, without all these government supports, that the true cost of living rate would rise by about 5 percentage points across each borough. And so with that, I just want to wrap up. But the true cost of living can help measure sort of how we quantify family economic needs, how we think about all the different family types that exist across New York City and the needs that they particularly have, creating more targeted investments. We can validate key policy investments that this administration is making, like expanding universal no-cost childcare. We can benchmark and track policy impacts to use as a baseline to see whether costs are going up, are they going down, and are we closing the gap? And we can drive cross-agency policy action with everyone on this call here today, because we know that this crisis cannot be tackled without each and every one of us being able to address the cost of living at this moment in time. It requires a cross-agency policy action across all these different cost category areas in the most ways to make sure that this city we call home is a city that we can continue to live in and afford and meet. So with that, I'm going to pass over to my beloved colleague, Madeline, and to take it away.
Thank you so much, Shahab, and thank you to everyone joining us this morning. My name is Madeline Naily. I'm the Chief of Policy and Research at FPWA, and I'm here to talk about how we can use the true cost of living, TCOL, to guide more equitable budgeting and policymaking in the city. I want to start with reiterating the simple but critical point that folks have been making. Economic insecurity in New York City is not confined to poverty. Next slide, please. It affects people earning minimum wage and millions more earning far more and going far up the wage ladder. And until now, we didn't have a tool designed to see this. For decades, we've relied on the federal poverty level, the FPL, to define need and determine eligibility for essential programs. But FPL was developed in the 60s based on flawed methodology, assuming that families spend a third of their income on groceries. It's not geographically specific, and it doesn't reflect modern costs or how people actually live. As a result, it draws an artificial line between poor and not poor while obscuring the much larger group of New Yorkers who are economically insecure. The true cost of living changes that. TCOL reflects what it actually costs to live in New York City, not just to survive, but to have stability, opportunity, and the foundation to thrive. And critically, it includes savings because getting by is not the same thing as being secure. To put this into perspective, in 2022, the data year we're using, the federal poverty level for a family of three was just over $23,000. In 2026, it's now just over $27,000. But the true cost of living for a family of three at that time ranged from over $114,000 to $171,000 based on the family composition. This gap tells us something important. People can be far above the poverty line and still be economically insecure. Next slide, please. But where New York City leads, the world follows. And right now we have an opportunity not just to lead in measurement, but to lead in how we define and respond to economic need. Across the country, policymakers are already recognizing that hardship does not end at the poverty line. And just recently, Washington State enacted a millionaire's tax, which will be increasing expected revenue by $3.7 billion in the state. They're going to use that funds to expand the state's working families tax credit and use the state's needs standard to ensure eligibility for the credit is moving from about $68,000, that's the cutoff for a family of three, to $137,000 for a family of three. So again, folks earning far more will now be eligible for that credit because they recognize as well that the cost of living is not keeping up and the standards they've been using to date weren't measuring that. Next slide, please. So TCOL gives us a powerful tool to think about policymaking and budgeting. It gives us narrative power. It allows us to reframe the conversation from poverty and assistance to economic security and opportunity. It gives us research power. It replaces outdated poverty benchmarks with a real understanding of costs and resources, allowing us to evaluate whether policies move people toward or away from economic security. And it gives us policymaking power. TCOL can and should become a governing standard, a way to align eligibility, benefits, and investments with the real cost of living in our city. As economist Derek Hamilton likes to remind us, we value what we measure and we measure what we value. If we measure inadequately, we design policies inadequately. And when we design policies inadequately, we reproduce inequality. Until now, we were measuring in a way that left millions of New Yorkers out of view. Next slide, please. So to make this real, I want to introduce you to Anu, conveniently named Anu Yorker, is a single mother with two young children. She recently completed her master's degree and works for a human services organization contracted with the city. She earns a little more than $74,000 a year, and that puts her at more than 3 times the poverty level, just under 325% FPL, and $7,000 more than the median resources held by a single parent with 2 kids. By traditional measures, Anu is doing well, but here's the reality. She is still nearly $40,000 short of what it takes to meet the true cost of living here in New York City. Anu is not living in poverty, but she is living in economic insecurity, and she's not alone. She represents millions of New Yorkers whose needs are not captured by our current system. Like more than 2 million people, Anu is within 50 to 75% of the TCOL threshold, which we heard from Shahab is that largest group of about 25% of New Yorkers. Next slide. So as we look at Anu's life, we see a consistent pattern across systems of how she tries to navigate the city to reduce costs so she can raise her family. Prior to completing her degree and increasing her salary, she fell behind on her rent and her landlord started eviction proceedings. The city offers a right to counsel, and Anu tried to take advantage of that. Unfortunately, right to counsel is determined by a federal poverty level, and her salary put her about $30,000 higher than the 200 FPL threshold. But due to her family size and income, she was eligible to enter a lottery for a 2-bedroom apartment. Her earnings put her at about 60% of the AMI bracket, and she was selected for a 2-bedroom. Her rent decreased to about $1,400 a month. She's no longer rent burdened, paying only 23% of her monthly income toward rent. But here, her eligibility depended both on a restricted threshold and luck. Childcare, huge cost for Anu and all parents of young children. As we heard from Shahab, the TCOL shows that the median childcare costs are about $13,000 for a family. This is likely an underestimation for a single parent with 2 young kids. And TCOL shows us that just the first kid adds about $27,000 to your budget. So fortunately, Anu's youngest received a spot in the city's new 2K program, reducing her childcare costs significantly. But again, until we treat childcare and early childhood education as a public good, access is going to depend on luck, and costs are financially destabilizing for single-parent households and low and moderate income families. Next, Anu tries to reduce her healthcare costs, but she's not eligible for the Essential Plan, which offered $0 premiums and deductibles, but only covered New Yorkers up to 200% FPL and is on the cutting block because of federal inaction. Her children are eligible for the Child Health Plus, reducing some costs. She tried to cut her transit costs, but Fair Fares, which offers half-price transit for New Yorkers, only goes up to those earning 145% of FPL. She's not eligible for SNAP, 130% FPL, or WIC, 185% FPL. So across every domain, the message is the same. Our system assumes once you've met the federal poverty level, or maybe about 200% of it, you're secure. But the lived reality of millions of New Yorkers tells us otherwise. Next slide. So where is Anu now? Even after accessing what support she can, she still cannot close the gap between her income and costs. She has no savings, she skips meals so her kids can eat, she falls behind on her student loans, and she considers dropping her own health insurance. In fact, she's considering leaving the city altogether. When economically insecure residents leave the city, we're not just losing individuals, we're losing our workforce and we're losing community members that make our city what it is. Here are a few things I think we want to take away from this example. First, and most importantly perhaps, without the TCOL, we wouldn't see Anu or the millions of other New Yorkers like her. Her salary is well above the federal poverty level, and she earns more than double the minimum wage. Without TCOL, she's invisible. With it, she becomes central to how we build family-sustaining policies. Second, we see the places that FPL and other metrics ensure that eligibility is too restrictive. TCOL gives us a robust view of what costs families have, providing a guide for how and where the city can reduce those costs. It also shows us where individuals and families get their resources, again highlighting how and where the city can intervene. Next slide. Here's another way of looking at what economic insecurity looks like in practice, and we saw a similar slide from Shahab. Not one overwhelming cost, but a system where every essential cost category is high, and together they exceed the resources the families have. It's what economic insecurity looks like in our city. Again, not a major crisis in any specific area, but a constant imbalance. And when we look at it here, even if the median family isn't rent burdened, they're only paying 21.5%, 22% of their income in rent, even with moderate incomes well above poverty, they're still not able to meet all of those costs and save for the future. It's unsustainable. Next slide. So what are some key takeaways? Economic insecurity spans far beyond poverty, affecting both low-wage workers and those earning significantly more. Our current measures are misaligned with reality, and as a result, we don't have the full picture for policymaking until now. TCOL makes visible the full spectrum of need that our current system ignores. It helps us understand the major drivers of economic insecurity, where people need to spend their money, and where they receive the resources to cover those costs. And we can then see where our current policies do or do not provide sufficient eligibility or coverage to reduce costs or increase resources. As Deputy Mayor Sue reminded us, economic security must be treated as essential infrastructure, guiding budgeting and policymaking. And the TCOL helps us identify areas of focus to ensure the greatest advancement in economic security for the greatest number of people. The question before us is not whether New Yorkers are working hard enough to make ends meet. It's whether our policies are working for them. TCOL gives us the tools to answer that honestly and to act. And now I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Jared Lanius, to facilitate our Q&A.
Thanks very much, Madeline, and thank you to the advocates, human services workers, nonprofit leaders, policy staff, researchers, et cetera, who are in the audience joining us for today's presentation and who have been submitting awesome questions throughout today's conversation. Like Madeline said, I'm Jared Lanius from the FPWA team, and I'm going to be teeing up questions for our experts. So I would like to welcome back to the virtual stage Commissioner Atta-Mensah, Shahab, and Madeline, and I'm going to roll us through some questions. We are going to be a little bit limited on time for Q&A, so I want to note that I've been responding to some questions via text in the Q&A function. We're going to roll through as many of these as we can, and we'll see what we can get to. So I'm going to start with some folks pre-submitted questions before the as they were registering for the event, and I want to start with some of those questions, and a lot of them ended up being reflected in what was asked in the Q&A today. Commissioner, I'm going to start with you. This is a question that a few different folks have echoed. Given that 62% of New Yorkers fall below the true cost of living threshold, how can the city translate these findings into action? Folks have been asking about specific agencies. How can the city advocate to the state and federal government? So would just be curious for some reflections on how the city can put these data to work.
Thank you, Jared. So listen, a few things. And I appreciate the question because jarring statistics require like a whole of government approach. And you've heard from many of us today that the goal here is not to have a shiny report that we put on the stands. It's to actually have a tool. And so I answer in that vein, right? So first and foremost, we see that there are two levers here that it's the reducing costs, and clearly government has a role to play in reducing costs that are necessities to being able to live in the city, and increasing resources. So on the reducing cost side, clearly childcare, healthcare costs, and others are part of what are necessities for New Yorkers. And so the administration has already made one of their priorities issues of childcare. So being able to reduce childcare costs will go to help action step these findings and bringing more and more families closer to the true cost of living. On the resources side, targeted wage policies, expanding tax credits, helping to close gaps in benefits can push New Yorkers closer to the threshold of wanting to move folks up the economic mobility ladder. Clearly, the city and municipalities have the power of procurement, right? Like we cannot escape that. That is a huge piece. Looking at adding the possibilities of wage clauses to new and renewed service contractors. And I should also say part of this tool is to use this for policy simulation so that we're actually looking through a framework of will this policy, both in creation and implementation, bring us closer to our goals for allowing families to actually live and thrive in dignity and making sure there is a framework and prism of equity to ensure that we are not leaving behind New Yorkers who communities have not had disinvestment for far too long. So top lines, investment, dealing with cost, being and making sure that we are helping to drive conversations and actions around resources.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that detailed answer. Shahab, I'm going to go to you next. We've been getting a lot of questions about the methodology, so it must be an audience with some, saying this lovingly, a lot of nerds. So I'm going to ask a few different versions of this question, which I think if you don't mind starting with, and maybe we'll just like sort of leave it there for now, what sets TCOL apart from some of the other metrics that folks might be familiar with that are above the poverty threshold. Why is the city using this methodology, and why does the city think that this is the sort of best way to account for economic security at the New York City level?
Yeah, so thank you, Jared, for that beautiful question. We find that the true cost of living measure, as we've currently constructed it, is super comprehensive, right? We capture 12 essential cost category areas from housing, childcare, healthcare, food, transportation, taxes, savings, technology, and so much more, in a way that other that are calibrated specifically to New York City and the unique sort of experiences and circumstances of what New Yorkers experience, in a way that uh, uh, other measures don't. And so we're able to capture debt and savings. I think those are two really big pieces that allow for us to understand a bit more about what does it mean to live with dignity. And then on the resources side, we're able to measure all the resources, not just income, right? So we're looking at capturing wages and looking at tax credits and cash transfers and the in-kind benefits, specifically the New York City supports that are also being provided too, and being able to understand what it costs to live here versus what people have is will help us like create an actual pathway, a defined pathway towards that. I think it's also just really important to note that like, different tools answer different questions, right? And I think the question we're trying to answer is what does it actually take to what is what does it cost to live with dignity in New York City? And I think that is a very specific question, and it requires us to take a much more comprehensive, broader approach in the cost category areas that are essential to be able to meet those particular needs.
Thanks very much. Madeline, over to you now. We had a question. Somebody asked how New York City compares to New York State. Obviously, we know that this measure, the true cost of living measure, is just for New York City and it's bespoke for New York City, but I think that we do have some information on the state. Do you mind speaking to that?
Sure. And I will hold back the joke about how does New York City compare to the state as someone who lives in New York City. So using the national true cost of economic security measure, which Jennifer spoke about at the beginning, we can look at what's happening across the country and compare that to what's happening in our city. So New York City's true cost of living is higher than most other areas of the state, and fewer people here are able then to reach that threshold. But that said, using this national data, we see that New York State is more economically insecure than the national average, and more than half of all residents in the state and 60% of residents with children across the state live below the threshold. So this is a problem statewide. Now, the national TCES data does use county level data, but we don't have data from every single county across the state. So at FPWA, we believe that we should be working to pass state legislation to ensure that we have a measure at the state level that's going to give us the same data and the same granularity that we have at the city so that we can ensure that the policies we're making are going to work across the state for all New York families.
Thank you, Madeline. This next question, Commissioner, I'm going to direct this to you, but anyone can also feel free to jump in. We've been talking a lot about some of the headier ideas, data, methodology, all these things, but we got a really great question, which is just, what are folks doing who are below the TCOL line? How do they get by day to day? What sorts of choices are they having to make? And how do we see those folks who are below the threshold, including those who are furthest below it?
Sure. I intimated on some of this in my opening, but I'll share, and I know many of the folks who are on here today as nonprofit leaders, as policy, I saw some organizers from One Bronx. No, it is the ingenuity of New Yorkers. It is frankly having to make the decisions that many should not have to. It is relying on community. I'm a mother of two, and many a times I've had to, hey, can you watch such and such for an hour or so while I go do this? While you're trying to make decisions about, do I really need to buy this new shirt for my interview or do I need to buy this food? Not ordering that DoorDash because you see the tax zone is a little too high. Maybe I'm going to walk down the street and get that food. It is all these little decisions that we are forced to make, or that many New Yorkers are forced to make. And for the ones who are living the furthest below, it is decisions regarding what necessity they will do without. That is what's the most concerning. It is not the DoorDash that I referenced, that I have the luxury of making. It is whether or not I'm going to buy medication. It is if I miss this next month of rent, am I going to be sued? It is all the things. This is the end of the school year where students are making decisions about prom and activities. It's whether or not the parent can actually pay that fee so that their child has participation. So the impact on for far too long measuring poverty as opposed to measuring aspiration and opportunity so that folks can live and enjoy their neighborhoods. Many neighborhoods that they have made global destinations has left us in a dearth. So I am excited about the opportunity to both understand poverty and how it impacts people, but also to have a study that allows us to look where we want to achieve as government operators and as providers. So I'm excited for the opportunity to work with so many of you so that we can make it so less and less people need to make those types of decisions in New York City.
Thank you so much. We are coming up on our close here. We've gotten, unfortunately, a lot more great questions than we're able to answer. So there will be follow-up emails. So for the folks in the audience, watch your inboxes. We'll send, make sure that the full report is linked, and also make sure that you have contacts so that you can follow up with folks to ask questions. We've had a lot of really great suggestions for, ways to potentially enhance and improve the methodology and future iterations. And Shahab, I see you nodding your head. I love that. So I'm going to close out the Q&A there, understanding that we want to get everybody out on time. Really, really appreciate you, Commissioner Atta-Mensah, Madeline, and Shahab for answering some questions. And I am now going to turn things back over to Jennifer Jones-Austin to close us out of today's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jared. Thank you to Commissioner Afua Atta-Mensah, as well as Shahab, as well as Madeline, and of course, Deputy Mayor Sue. Want to thank all of you who've joined us for this very important, very critical conversation. And I want you to appreciate that it's just the beginning. Just the beginning. This measure was created not just as something like, background information or background noise, but it was created so that we would have a tool that we all can use to help shape and inform policy and to understand the situation of the situations that present for individuals, for families who every day are struggling here in our city and even beyond. Now, what I want everybody to appreciate is that this this tool can only be effective if we build a community where we have advocates, researchers, policymakers coming together to translate this data into action, to make sure that we're actually utilizing this tool. And then what we're believing is that New York City can be the proof point. We can engage and build a statewide coalition, as Madeline said, to lay the groundwork for legislation at the state, to commission its true cost study, because we need the state to be doing this as well. What the state does in turn will affect what happens here in New York City. So we want this for New York State. We want it at the federal level. We're working alongside congressional leaders like Congresswoman Gwen Moore to socialize national data with legislators and build towards national adoption. But none of this is going to happen without the support of a coalition of well-intentional, well-engaged individuals who are here to do this work with us. So if you're not yet a member of this coalition, we invite you to join in this critical work. You can scan the QR code on the screen. It's going to direct you to our on-site page and newsletter, and it's also going to provide you with information for how you can get involved. Adding your organization's voice is going to strengthen the case that we're making to policymakers. It's going to strengthen community voice, advocate voice, academics voice, and those in city municipalities like our commissioner, like our deputy mayor, who are doing this work. So we want you to lend your voice, become a part of the coalition. You can find out more by visiting the website. So bottom line, we've got to make economic security the standard for all, not just, deprivation and subsistence. We can do that together. Thank you all for joining us. Let's get to work. Bye.